March 15th, 2024. The Pirates of Tortuga set had been running smoothly for 6 weeks. Victor Sterling watched from the shadows as Dylan Cross raised his cutlass toward Johnny Depp. The kid was good, too confident. That's when Sterling saw the rigging, the same sabotage pulley system that had crippled Tommy Reeves 15 years ago, same angle, same deadly flaw. Cross lunged forward, unaware that in 3 seconds, 2,000 pounds of ship rigging would come crashing down exactly where Depp stood. Sterling had 30 feet to cover and no time to explain. The crew later said they'd never seen a 62-year-old man move that fast. The studio executives called emergency meetings. And for the first time in 15 years, Victor Sterling's name was whispered on every lot in Hollywood. The day he saved Johnny Depp's life, the day he realized his past had followed him home. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The silence that followed the crash was deafening. Victor Sterling lay sprawled across Johnny Depp's legs, both men pinned beneath a tangle of rope and splintered wood. The massive ship's boom, 2,000 pounds of oak and iron, had missed Depp's head by inches, embedding itself in the deck where the actor had been standing moments before. Sawdust and debris settled around them like snow. "Jesus Christ," someone whispered from behind the cameras. Sterling pushed himself up, his 62-year-old body screaming in protest. His shoulder had taken the brunt of the impact, and he could feel something grinding in his rotator cuff. Blood seeped through his shirt sleeve. Depp was already sitting up, brushing splinters from his dark hair, those famous eyes wide with shock and something else. Recognition. "You okay?" Sterling asked, though his voice came out as more of a croak. Depp nodded slowly, never breaking eye contact. "You saved my life." The set erupted into chaos. Assistant directors barked orders. The medic rushed over with his kit. Dylan Cross stood frozen 10 feet away, his cutlass still raised mid-thrust, his cocky expression replaced by pale confusion. The kid had no idea how close he'd come to accidentally killing Hollywood royalty. But Sterling wasn't looking at Cross. His eyes were fixed on the rigging above, specifically the pulley system that had failed. From his position on the deck, he could see what the accident investigation would miss: the clean cut in the support cable, hidden beneath layers of frayed rope designed to look like natural wear. Someone had tried to kill Johnny Depp. Someone had used the exact same method that had destroyed Tommy Reeves 15 years ago. Victor Sterling? The voice belonged to Sarah Chen, the film's first assistant director. She crouched beside him, her clipboard forgotten in the chaos. "The medic wants to check you out." Sterling studied her face, earnest, concerned, competent. Sarah had been nothing but professional during his 3 weeks on set. But then again, so had everyone else who might want him dead. Or worse, who might want to use him as the fall guy. Again, "I'm fine," he said, accepting her hand up. The movement sent fire through his shoulder, but he'd worked through worse. "Just need to check the rigging." "The rigging?" Sarah's brow furrowed. "Vic, you're bleeding. And that boom came out of nowhere." "It didn't come out of nowhere." The words were out before he could stop them. The medic appeared at his elbow, a young guy with kind eyes and gentle hands. "Sir, I need you to sit down. You're showing signs of shock, and that cut needs—" "The cut's fine." Sterling shrugged away from the medic's touch, his mind racing. He needed to get to that rigging before someone had a chance to fix the evidence. "Where's the stunt coordinator?" "Marcus is on his way," Sarah said. "But Vic, the insurance people are going to want to talk to you. You technically weren't supposed to be that close to the action." Insurance people, studio executives, investigators. The same circus that had surrounded him 15 years ago, except this time he was the hero instead of the villain. The irony wasn't lost on him. Sterling watched as crew members began clearing the debris. In 5 minutes, the evidence would be contaminated. In 10, it might disappear entirely. He'd seen it happen before. The careful choreography of a cover-up, the way inconvenient truths got buried under paperwork and NDAs. "I need to make a call," he said. Sarah nodded, but her expression remained troubled. The studio's arranging counseling for everyone who witnessed the accident. They want to make sure this wasn't an accident. The words hung in the air between them. Sarah's eyes widened, and Sterling realized he'd crossed a line. In Hollywood, you didn't accuse people of attempted murder without proof. Not if you wanted to work again. Not if you wanted to stay alive. But as he looked around the set, at the dozens of crew members who'd gone silent, at Dylan Cross still standing frozen with his sword, at Johnny Depp being helped to his feet by concerned assistants, Sterling felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He'd walked away 15 years ago, taken the blame, served his time in professional exile, and convinced himself that keeping quiet was the noble thing to do. But Tommy Reeves was still in a wheelchair because Sterling had been a coward. He wouldn't make the same mistake twice. Sterling pulled out his phone and scrolled to a contact he hadn't called in 3 years. Detective Ray Gutierrez, LAPD. The only cop in the city who'd believed Sterling's story about Tommy's accident. The only one who'd kept digging after the case was officially closed. The same cop who'd warned Sterling that coming back to work on studio productions was like painting a target on his back. Sterling looked up at the rigging one more time, memorizing the angles, the cuts, the careful staging. Then he hit call. It was time to stop running from the truth. Ray picked up on the second ring, his voice gravelly with years of cigarettes and disappointment. Sterling, figured I'd be hearing from you soon. How did you? Sterling started, then stopped. Of course Ray had heard. In a town built on gossip and information, a near miss involving Johnny Depp would travel through the LAPD faster than a studio press release. They tried again, Ray. I know. Same MO as Tommy Reeves? Sterling closed his eyes, remembering the weight of Johnny Depp beneath him, the sound of splintering wood, the clean slice in the cable. Identical. Shit. A long pause. Sterling could picture Ray at his desk, probably nursing cold coffee and contemplating early retirement for the 1,000th time. You okay? Bruised shoulder. Nothing compared to what could have happened. Sterling walked away from the chaos, finding a quiet corner behind the false storefront of Port Royal. The smell of sawdust and sea salt lingered in the air. Too real for a Hollywood set, probably pumped in through hidden vents to help the actors get into character. Everything here was manufactured, designed, calculated, even the danger. Where are you now? Ray asked. Still on set. They haven't cleared the scene yet, but they will soon. Ray, if I'm right about this, if the same person who destroyed my career is still out there, then Sarah's in danger. The admission hung between them like a confession. Sterling hadn't spoken his daughter's name to Ray in 3 years. Not since that disastrous Christmas dinner when she'd accused him of being a paranoid drunk and he'd accused her of being naive about the industry that had raised her. They'd barely spoken since, their relationship reduced to stilted text messages and awkward encounters at industry events. But Sarah was here now, working as first ad on this cursed production, her efficiency and competence making her indispensable to the very people who might want Sterling dead. The thought made his chest tight with a fear that had nothing to do with personal safety. Sarah's a smart kid, Ray said gently. She's not going to get caught in the crossfire. She already is. Sterling watched through a gap in the set walls as Sarah coordinated with the medics, her movements precise and professional. She had her mother's grace under pressure, her mother's ability to bring order to chaos. It's what made her good at her job. It's also what made her a target. She knows something's wrong. I saw it in her face when I said it wasn't an accident. Maybe that's good. Maybe she'll be careful. Careful won't save her if they decide she's a liability. Sterling's voice cracked on the words. I lost everything 15 years ago, Ray. My career, my reputation, my family. I can't lose her too. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of everything they'd both seen in their respective careers. The casual cruelty of powerful people, the way innocents got caught in webs they never saw coming. Ray had worked Hollywood cases long enough to know that blood and family meant nothing when studio profits were at stake. Tell me about the daughter, Ray said finally. Sterling smiled despite everything. Sarah Chen, 28, graduated from USC Film School summa cum laude. She's been working her way up the ladder for 6 years, never trading on my name. Hell, she won't even use it. Smart, driven, honest to a fault. He paused, remembering the last real conversation they'd had before everything went to shit. She used to want to be a stunt coordinator like her old man. Before she learned what that really meant, she knows about Tommy Reeves? She knows the official story. That I screwed up, cut corners, got reckless. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. She doesn't know that I took the fall to protect someone else. Someone who turned out to be protecting the real killer. Through the gap in the walls, Sterling watched Dylan Cross finally lower his sword, the young actor's face pale with delayed shock. Cross reminded him of Tommy at that age, cocky, fearless, convinced of his own invincibility, the kind of kid who'd push boundaries just to prove he could, never imagining that someone might want to use that recklessness against him. "I'm coming down there," Ray said. "Don't touch anything else. Don't talk to anyone else, and for God's sake, don't go anywhere alone. Ray." Victor. The use of his first name carried weight. 15 years ago, you were young enough and drunk enough to think you could handle this alone. You're not that guy anymore. Let me help you. Sterling ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. The smell of sawdust was stronger now, mixed with something else, machine oil and metal shavings, the sense of deliberate destruction. Somewhere in this maze of sets and stages, a killer was hiding in plain sight. But this time, Sterling wouldn't be facing them alone. Sterling was halfway back to the crash site when he saw the envelope. It lay on his director's chair like a prop from the film itself. Aged parchment, sealed with dark wax, his name written in elegant script across the front. The kind of theatrical touch that would have made him roll his eyes if it weren't sitting exactly where he'd left his jacket 15 minutes earlier. Someone had been watching. Someone had known exactly when he'd be alone. The chaos around the accident scene continued. Crew members hauling debris, insurance investigators taking photographs, Sarah coordinating the cleanup with military precision. But the envelope sat untouched in the eye of the storm, as if everyone else was unconsciously avoiding it. Sterling approached slowly, his damaged shoulder throbbing with each step. The wax seal bore no impression, just a smooth circle of burgundy that looked like dried blood in the artificial twilight of the soundstage. His fingers trembled as he broke it open. Inside was a single photograph and a handwritten note. The photo hit him like a physical blow. Tommy Reeves, age 23, standing on the deck of the Black Pearl's Revenge set 15 years ago. But this wasn't a publicity shot or behind-the-scenes candid. This was taken moments before the accident. Tommy grinning at the camera, one hand on the rigging that would collapse and destroy his spine, the other giving a thumbs up to whoever was holding the camera. Sterling had never seen this photo before. In the background, barely visible but unmistakably there, was a figure in a crew jacket. The person was turned away from the camera, but Sterling knew that silhouette had worked alongside it for months. Marcus Webb, the stunt coordinator who'd vouched for Sterling's safety protocols, who'd sworn the accident was unforeseeable, who'd helped Sterling construct the narrative that kept them both out of prison. Marcus Webb, who was the stunt coordinator on this film. Sterling's hands shook as he unfolded the note. The same elegant handwriting, the same theatrical flair. "Victor, I thought you might enjoy this memento from our last collaboration. Marcus was so helpful back then, wasn't he? Such a loyal friend, taking your word about the safety checks, backing up your timeline, making sure the investigation reached the right conclusions. It's fascinating how guilt can bind people together, how shared secrets create such unbreakable bonds. But bonds can be broken, can't they? Especially when old friends start asking inconvenient questions. Poor Tommy sends his regards, by the way. He's been following your career with great interest, or should I say, your lack thereof. Welcome back to the game, a friend." The letter slipped from Sterling's nerveless fingers as the implications crashed over him. Marcus hadn't been an unwitting accomplice. He'd been part of it from the beginning. The safety protocol Sterling remembered filing, the equipment checks he'd sworn he'd completed, the timeline that had cleared them both of criminal negligence. All of it constructed with Marcus's help. But more than that, someone else knew. Someone had been watching 15 years ago, photographing the setup, documenting Marcus's involvement. Someone who'd stayed silent all this time, letting Sterling twist in the wind while Marcus rebuilt his career. Someone who was here now, on this set, close enough to place a letter on Sterling's chair while chaos reigned around them. "Vic?" Sarah's voice cut through his spiraling thoughts. She was standing 10 feet away, her expression concerned. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Sterling bent to retrieve the letter, his movements careful and deliberate. How long had she been standing there? Had she seen him open the envelope? The paranoia that had nearly destroyed him 15 years ago came rushing back like a tide. "Just tired," he managed. "It's been a long day." But Sarah was looking at the envelope in his hands, her brow furrowed. "What's that?" "Nothing important." Sterling folded the letter and slipped it into his jacket pocket, but he could feel the weight of it like a stone. "Where's Marcus?" "He's up in the rigging with the investigators." Sarah's frown deepened. "Why?" Sterling followed her gaze upward, where he could see Marcus Webb's familiar silhouette moving among the pulleys and cables. The man who'd helped destroy Tommy Reeves, who'd built his career on Sterling's ruined reputation, who was now positioned to do it all over again. The man who might not even know he was being manipulated by someone else. "I need to talk to him," Sterling said. "Vic, what's going on? First you say the accident wasn't an accident. Now you're acting like I'm paranoid?" The words came out sharper than he'd intended. "Maybe I am. Maybe that's what keeps people alive in this business." Sarah stepped back as if he'd slapped her, and Sterling immediately regretted the harshness in his voice. But the photograph burned in his memory. Tommy's trusting smile, Marcus's turned back, the careful staging of destruction. Somewhere on this set, a killer was preparing for their next move, and Sterling was no longer sure who he could trust to help him stop it. Sterling watched Sarah walk away, her shoulders rigid with hurt and confusion. The space between them felt like a chasm, and he wanted nothing more than to call her back, to explain everything. But the weight of the photograph in his pocket stopped him cold. How could he tell his daughter that he'd been living a lie for 15 years? That her father wasn't just a disgraced stunt coordinator, but a man who'd been manipulated into covering up attempted murder? He needed to think, to process, to find some way to approach Marcus without tipping their hand to whoever was pulling the strings. Sterling headed toward the craft services table, hoping to blend into the background while he figured out his next move. The familiar routine of pretending normalcy, grabbing a cup of coffee, checking his phone, looking like just another crew member dealing with the aftermath of an accident, felt like a lifeline to sanity. But the moment he reached for the coffee pot, conversations around him died. It started with the key grip, a burly guy named Pete who'd been friendly enough during Sterling's first weeks on set. Pete caught sight of him and immediately looked away, muttering something to his assistant before walking quickly toward the exit. Then the script supervisor, who'd always nodded politely when they passed, suddenly found her paperwork fascinating when Sterling approached. "Excuse me," Sterling said to the catering manager, a middle-aged woman who ran her station with military efficiency. She'd always been chatty before, eager to discuss the complexities of feeding a crew of 200. Now she barely looked at him. "Coffee's fresh," she said curtly, her eyes focused somewhere over his shoulder. "Thanks." Sterling poured himself a cup, his movements deliberately casual. "Hell of a day, huh?" She was already turning away, busying herself with unnecessary reorganization of the pastry display. The silence spread like a virus. Conversations resumed only after Sterling moved away, voices carefully lowered. He caught fragments, told you something was off about him. And just like before, and most chilling of all, Sarah better be careful. Sterling's coffee cup trembled in his hand. Someone had been working the crew, spreading poison, preparing the ground. The same pattern that had destroyed him 15 years ago whispered concerns about his stability, questions about his judgment, the gradual erosion of trust that made him the perfect scapegoat when things went wrong. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Check your email. Old friends miss you." Sterling's blood turned to ice. He pulled up his email app with shaking fingers, scrolling past the usual industry newsletters and spam. There, at the top of his inbox, was a message from an address he didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Memory Lane." The email contained a video file. Sterling looked around the craft services area, still being watched, still being whispered about, and headed for the bathroom where he could view it privately. The video quality was grainy, clearly shot with a hidden camera 15 years ago. It showed Sterling and Marcus in the rigging area of the Black Pearl's revenge set, their voices low but audible. "The insurance on this thing is massive," Marcus was saying in the video. "If something goes wrong, they'll look for someone to blame." "Then we make sure nothing goes wrong," Sterling replied, his younger self checking a cable connection. "These protocols exist for a reason. What if something did go wrong, though? Hypothetically." Marcus moved closer to the camera, his face filling the frame. What if someone wanted it to look like equipment failure, but they needed a fall guy? Sterling watched his past self pause in his work. "What are you talking about, Marcus?" "Nothing. Just thinking out loud." Marcus glanced directly at the camera for just a moment, and Sterling realized with sick certainty that Marcus had known he was being recorded. "You've got a good reputation, Vic. People trust you. That's worth something. I'm not following. You don't need to follow. Just, if something happens, remember that we're in this together. Whatever the investigators find, we tell the same story, right?" The video ended with Sterling's younger self nodding, still confused but trusting his colleague. Sterling stared at the phone screen, understanding flooding through him like poison. Marcus hadn't just been complicit, he'd been setting Sterling up from the beginning, creating evidence that made Sterling look like a willing participant in whatever was about to happen to Tommy Reeves. But who had been holding the camera? Who had orchestrated this entire elaborate frame job, and why were they reaching out now? His phone buzzed again. Another text: "Marcus is about to have an accident. Unless you do exactly what I say." Sterling's hands went numb. He burst out of the bathroom, scanning the rigging area frantically. Marcus was still up there, 30 feet above the deck, inspecting the failed equipment with 2 insurance investigators, and one of the pulleys supporting their platform was beginning to fray, its metal housing slowly separating from the main support beam. Sterling ran toward the rigging, shouting Marcus's name, but his voice was lost in the ambient noise of the busy set. The investigators were leaning over the edge of the platform, completely unaware that death was literally hanging over their heads. Someone wanted Sterling to watch Marcus die. Someone wanted him to be helpless, guilty, and perfectly positioned to take the blame once again. This time, Sterling refused to play their game. Sterling's warning shout cut through the set noise like a blade. "GET down from there. The rigging's compromised." Marcus looked down, confusion flickering across his face for the split second before the pulley housing snapped completely. The platform lurched sideways, cables whining under sudden stress as 30 feet of death yawned beneath 3 men who suddenly understood they were about to die. Sterling was already moving, muscle memory from decades of stunt work overriding conscious thought. He grabbed the emergency brake for the secondary rigging system, a backup he'd insisted on installing during his first week over budget protests from the producers. The brake engaged with a grinding shriek of metal, arresting the platform's fall with a bone-jarring jolt that left all 3 men clinging to the railings. "Jesus Christ," one of the investigators gasped, his face white as paper. "What the hell?" "Everyone stay calm," Sterling shouted up at them. "Don't move until we get a ladder truck over here." But even as he coordinated the rescue, Sterling's mind was racing with darker calculations. The text had said Marcus was about to have an accident unless he did exactly what they said. He'd prevented the accident, but what were the consequences of defying his anonymous tormentor? The answer came within minutes. While the crew scrambled to position a ladder truck, Sterling felt his phone buzz with an incoming call. Unknown number. He stepped away from the commotion and answered. "Impressive reflexes," said a voice that sent ice through his veins. Electronically distorted, completely unrecognizable, but carrying an undertone of amused malevolence. "I wondered if you'd lost your edge after all these years of self-pity." "Who is this?" Sterling kept his voice low, his eyes scanning the crowd of crew members around him. Any one of them could be holding the other end of this conversation. "Someone who knew your father very well," the voice replied, and Sterling's world tilted on its axis. His father had been dead for 25 years, killed in a helicopter crash while coordinating stunts for a war film. The official report had blamed mechanical failure, but Sterling had always wondered about the financial pressure his father had been under. The whispered rumors about cut corners and desperate choices. That's impossible. Nathan Sterling was a brilliant stunt coordinator. Innovative, fearless, utterly committed to his craft. Also deeply in debt, struggling to support a family, vulnerable to certain financial incentives. The voice paused, letting the implications sink in. You've inherited more than just his talent, Victor. Sterling watched Marcus being helped down from the ladder truck, the older man's face gray with shock and residual terror. The investigators were already examining the failed pulley system, their cameras capturing every detail of what would inevitably be ruled another equipment malfunction. What do you want? The same thing I wanted from your father, the same thing I got from Marcus 15 years ago. Cooperation. The voice carried the satisfaction of a chess master announcing checkmate. You see, Victor, this isn't about you at all. It never was. You're simply following a family tradition of doing what you're told when the stakes are high enough. Sterling's free hand clenched into a fist. Everything he'd believed about his father's death, about his own disgrace, about the random cruelty of an industry that chewed up the innocent, all of it had been orchestrated, planned, inherited like some toxic legacy passed down through generations. Tommy Reeves was never the real target, the voice interrupted. Just like your father's helicopter crash was never about the helicopter. Sometimes you have to break a few eggs to send a message to the people who really matter. Sometimes you have to destroy a few careers to protect the ones that count. Through the crowd, Sterling caught sight of Sarah coordinating with the safety inspector, her competence and authority evident in every gesture. His daughter, brilliant and driven and completely unaware that her bloodline had made her a target before she was even born. Sarah doesn't know anything, he said desperately. She's not part of this. Oh, but she is. She's been part of it since the day she decided to work in this industry. Since the day she chose to ignore Daddy's warnings about staying away from stunt work. Since the day she took this job despite knowing you'd be here. The voice carried a note of genuine satisfaction now. She's the next generation, Victor. The next Sterling to learn the family business. Sterling's vision grayed at the edges. If you touch her, you'll what? Save her like you saved Marcus? Defy me like you just did? The laugh was like broken glass. You just proved you'll do anything to prevent people from dying, Victor, including exactly what I tell you to do. The call ended, leaving Sterling staring at his phone with the terrible understanding that his moment of heroism had been just another form of manipulation. By saving Marcus, he demonstrated that his strings could still be pulled, that his conscience could still be weaponized. Somewhere in the crowd around him, a killer was smiling. Sterling stood frozen among the bustling crew, the dead phone burning in his hand like a brand. The voice's words echoed in his skull, family tradition, and suddenly memories he'd buried came flooding back with sickening clarity. His father's last project, the helicopter crash that had killed Nathan Sterling and ended his career in a single moment of twisted metal and flame. Sterling had been 18 then, just starting to work as his father's assistant, learning the ropes that would define his life. He remembered the phone calls in those final weeks, his father's hushed conversations behind closed doors, the way Nathan's hands had shaken when he thought no one was looking, the mysterious meetings with studio executives that had left his father ashen-faced and drinking heavily. Sometimes you do things you don't want to do, son, Nathan had said one night, staring into his whiskey glass. Sometimes the choice isn't between right and wrong. Sometimes it's between wrong and catastrophic. Sterling had assumed his father was talking about budget pressures, about the compromises every stunt coordinator had to make. But now, with 15 years of perspective and the anonymous caller's revelation, those words took on a more sinister meaning. His father hadn't died in an accident. He'd been murdered because he'd refused to play along. Vic? Sarah's voice cut through his spiral of realization. She was approaching cautiously, her expression concerned. The safety inspector wants to debrief with you about the rigging failure. Sterling looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw Nathan Sterling's stubborn jaw, his own determination, and something else, something that made his blood run cold. Sarah had been the one to recommend Marcus Webb for this production. She'd been the one to push for Sterling's involvement as technical advisor, despite his reluctance to return to stunt work. She'd been the one coordinating with the insurance investigators, managing the safety protocols, overseeing the very systems that had failed today. Sarah, he said slowly, how long have you known Marcus? What do you mean? Her frown deepened. I've worked with him on 3 productions over the past 5 years. He's the one who told me you used to be the best in the business. Before, she caught herself. Before the accident. Yes. Sarah's voice was careful now, sensing dangerous undercurrents. Why are you asking? Sterling studied her face, searching for any sign of deception, any hint that she might be part of the web that had entangled his family for decades. But all he saw was genuine confusion and growing worry. Did Marcus ever talk about that accident? About what really happened on Black Pearl's revenge? Only that it destroyed your career unfairly. Sarah stepped closer, her voice dropping. Vic, what's going on? First you saved Marcus from what could have been a fatal accident. Now you're interrogating me about ancient history. It's not ancient history. Sterling pulled out his phone, scrolling to the video he'd received earlier. Someone's been playing games with our family for longer than you know. He showed her the grainy footage of his conversation with Marcus 15 years ago, watching her expression shift from confusion to understanding to horror. This was recorded without your knowledge? And sent to me today, along with a photograph of Tommy Reeves and a threat against you. Sterling's voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. Someone's been pulling strings for decades, Sarah. They killed your grandfather. They destroyed my career. And now they're coming for you. Sarah stared at the phone screen, her face pale. But this video, it makes it look like you and Marcus were planning something together. That's exactly what it was designed to do. Create evidence of conspiracy where none existed. Set up a fall guy in case things went wrong. Sterling pocketed the phone. The question is, who's been orchestrating this? And why? I don't know, Sarah whispered. Then, louder, but I know someone who might. She was looking across the set toward Marcus Webb, who was being checked by paramedics near the ladder truck. The older man caught their gaze and started walking toward them, his face grim with purpose. Vic, Marcus called out when he was still 20 feet away. We need to talk about Tommy Reeves, about what really happened 15 years ago. Sterling's body tensed, ready to run or fight, but Marcus raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. I know you don't trust me, Marcus continued, close enough now for Sterling to see the fear in his eyes. Hell, I wouldn't trust me either. But someone just tried to kill me to keep me quiet, which means they're ready to start cleaning house. Marcus glanced around the busy set, then leaned closer. I've been getting letters, Vic. Photographs. Threats. Someone knows I helped frame you, and they've been using it to control me ever since. The admission hit Sterling like a physical blow, even though he'd already known the truth. Hearing it confirmed that his friend had betrayed him, that his exile had been orchestrated, made it real in a way that photographs and anonymous calls couldn't. But more importantly, it meant Marcus was a victim too. And somewhere on this set, their puppet master was getting ready to cut the last of their strings. Sterling felt the world shift beneath his feet, but this time it wasn't vertigo. It was the terrible clarity of understanding. Marcus's confession hung in the air between them like smoke from a funeral pyre, acrid and final. How long? Sterling's voice was barely above a whisper. How long have they been controlling you? Marcus glanced at Sarah, hesitation flickering across his weathered features. Since the week after Tommy's accident. I thought I was free once you were gone, once the investigation closed. Then the first envelope showed up at my house. He pulled a crumpled photograph from his jacket pocket. The same image Sterling had received, showing Marcus tampering with the rigging that had crushed Tommy Reeves. But this copy was older, worn from handling, the edges soft with 15 years of guilty examination. They've owned me ever since, Marcus continued. Every job, every recommendation, every safety report, all filtered through them. I became their inside man in exchange for not going to prison. Sarah stepped closer, her face a mask of professional control barely containing personal devastation. Who's they, Marcus? Give us names. That's just it. I don't know. Marcus's laugh was bitter, hollow. 15 years of dancing to their tune, and I've never seen a face, never heard a real voice. Just instructions, deadlines, consequences for disobedience. Sterling's phone buzzed. Another text, family reunions are touching. Pity they always end badly. The three of them formed an unconscious triangle, backs to the world, voices low and urgent. Around them, the set continued its organized chaos. Grips moving equipment, actors running lines, directors arguing with producers about schedule changes. Normal Hollywood dysfunction, oblivious to the conspiracy unraveling in their midst. "There's something else," Marcus said, his voice cracking. "The reason I recommended Sarah for this production, it wasn't my idea." Sterling's blood turned to ice. "What do you mean?" The instructions were specific. Get Victor Sterling involved as technical advisor. Ensure Sarah Sterling is in a position of authority over safety protocols. Create circumstances where father and daughter are both present for— Marcus swallowed hard. For whatever they're planning to finish. Sarah's composure finally cracked. "You used me as bait?" "I tried to protect you." Marcus's voice rose, then dropped again as he caught himself. "I've been sabotaging their plans for months. Small things, equipment delays, permit issues, anything to slow down production. I thought if I could drag it out long enough, maybe find a way to expose them. That's why you've been having financial problems," Sterling realized. "They've been punishing you for the delays." Marcus nodded miserably. "My wife thinks I'm gambling again. My kids won't return my calls. But I couldn't. I won't let them destroy another Sterling." The weight of that admission settled over them like a shroud. 3 people bound together by decades of manipulation, each believing they were protecting the others, all of them dancing to music played by an invisible orchestra. Sterling looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw himself at 28, determined and idealistic and completely unprepared for the forces arrayed against her. The same age he'd been when his world had collapsed around Tommy Reeves's broken body. "Why us?" Sarah asked quietly. "Why our family specifically?" "I don't know," Sterling admitted. "But I think it goes back to Dad's death. Something he knew, something he wouldn't do." He paused, pieces clicking into place with horrible clarity. "Or someone he wouldn't protect." Marcus was nodding slowly. Nathan Sterling's last project before the helicopter crash. It was a war film called Blood and Honor. Same studio as Black Pearl's Revenge. Same executive producer as this current production. "Harold Kensington," Sarah breathed. Sterling felt the name hit him like a physical blow. Harold Kensington, the silver-haired studio legend who'd personally greenlit Sterling's return to stunt coordination, who'd insisted on Marcus Webb as rigging supervisor despite his recent financial troubles, who'd pushed for elaborate practical effects over safer CGI alternatives, who'd been present at every moment of Sterling family destruction for 25 years. "He's here today," Sarah continued, her voice hollow with realization. "Called a special meeting with Johnny Depp and Dylan Cross about tomorrow's big sword fight sequence, the one that's supposed to be the climactic moment of the entire film." Sterling's phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from an unknown number. He answered it on speaker, his hands steady despite the chaos in his mind. "Touching detective work," came the electronically distorted voice. "Though you're about 25 years too late to save anyone." "Kensington," Sterling said. It wasn't a question. "Tomorrow's sequence will be spectacular. A fitting end to both your father's legacy and your daughter's promising career. Unless, of course, you're willing to discuss terms." The call ended, leaving them standing in the eye of a hurricane that had been building for decades. The point of no return wasn't approaching anymore. They had already crossed it. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire ready to snap. Sterling stared at his phone's dark screen, seeing his father's face reflected in the black glass. Nathan Sterling, dead 25 years but still casting shadows across his son's life. "We're going to end this," Sterling said quietly. "Tonight." Sarah's hand found his arm. "Dad." "No." The word came out harder than he intended, sharpened by decades of buried rage. "I let them destroy my father. I let them frame me for Tommy's accident. I let them turn you into a target before you even knew you were playing their game." He looked at Marcus, then back at Sarah. "No more." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Vic, you don't understand what we're dealing with. Kensington has connections everywhere. Studio heads, insurance companies, safety boards. He's built his career on making problems disappear. We make sure this problem can't disappear." Sterling's voice carried the cold certainty of a man who'd finally stopped running from his past. "Where's that special meeting happening?" "Soundstage 7, Sarah said reluctantly. "But it's private. Security won't let anyone in without clearance." Sterling smiled grimly. They'll let in the technical advisor they specifically requested, especially if he's bringing urgent safety concerns about tomorrow's sequence. The walk across the studio lot felt like a death march, their footsteps echoing off concrete and steel. Sterling's mind raced through scenarios, contingencies, all the ways this could go catastrophically wrong. But beneath the tactical planning was something else, a deep, almost peaceful acceptance that this confrontation had been inevitable since the day he'd first picked up his father's rigging tools. Soundstage 7 loomed before them, its massive doors bearing warning signs about authorized personnel only. Through the small windows, Sterling could see the elaborate pirate ship set where tomorrow's climactic sword fight was scheduled to film. The same type of rigging that had killed Tommy Reeves, the same safety protocols that Marcus had been compromised into approving. "I should go in alone," Sterling said. "Absolutely not." Sarah's voice carried an echo of Nathan Sterling's stubborn determination. "We finish this together, or we don't finish it at all." Marcus pulled out his phone with shaking hands. "I'm calling the police." "With what evidence?" Sterling asked. 15 years of anonymous threats? A voice modulator? They'll write us off as industry paranoids. He studied the older man's face. "Besides, if we're wrong about Kensington, we've just destroyed an innocent man's reputation. And if we're right," Sarah added grimly, "we've warned him that we're coming." They approached the security desk together, Sterling's stride confident despite the chaos in his chest. The guard looked up from his magazine, recognized Sterling's studio credentials, and waved them through with barely a glance. Inside, voices echoed from the pirate ship set, Johnny Depp's distinctive cadence mixing with a younger voice that must be Dylan Cross, and underneath it all, the smooth baritone that Sterling remembered from his father's funeral. Harold Kensington, offering condolences with perfectly practiced sincerity, his silver hair immaculate even then. They climbed the metal stairs to the ship's deck, each step ringing like a bell. Sterling felt his daughter's presence beside him like an anchor, steady and strong, and realized that somewhere in the wreckage of his career he'd raised someone better than he'd ever been. The conversation stopped as they emerged onto the deck. Depp looked up with mild curiosity, Cross with obvious annoyance at the interruption. But it was Kensington's expression that confirmed everything, a flicker of something cold and calculating before his practiced smile slipped back into place. "Victor," Kensington said warmly, extending his hand, "I was hoping you'd join us. We were just discussing the safety protocols for tomorrow's sequence." Sterling didn't take the offered hand. "Were you? Or were you planning another accident?" The words hung in the salt-scented air like smoke from a discharged cannon. Depp's eyes sharpened with interest, while Cross looked confused. Kensington's smile never wavered, but Sterling caught the moment when the mask slipped, just for an instant, revealing something predatory underneath. "That's quite an accusation," Kensington said mildly. "I assume you have evidence to support such a claim?" 25 years of it. Sterling pulled out his phone, fingers steady as he queued up the video. "Starting with what you had Marcus do to Tommy Reeves and going all the way back to my father's helicopter." Kensington's composure cracked like ice on a warming lake. Nathan Sterling's death was a tragedy. Mechanical failure? Sabotage. The word cut through Kensington's protests like a blade. "Because my father wouldn't help you eliminate a rival studio star. Because he chose his conscience over your money." Sarah stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of her position and the fury of her bloodline. "Just like you've been using Marcus to manipulate safety protocols for 15 years. Just like you framed my father for an accident you orchestrated." Marcus emerged from the shadows where he'd been standing, his weathered face gray but determined. "I can prove it, Harold. Every instruction, every threat. I kept records." Kensington looked around the circle of faces. Sterling's controlled rage, Sarah's professional determination, Marcus's guilty courage, and beyond them, Depp and Cross bearing witness to the collapse of a carefully constructed lie. "You always were too clever for your own good, Victor," Kensington said finally, his voice stripped of its practiced warmth. "Just like your father." The admission fell between them like a death sentence, final and irreversible. In that moment, Sterling felt the weight of 25 years lift from his shoulders, replaced by something harder and more purposeful. The truth had finally been confronted. Now came justice. The silence that followed Kensington's admission stretched like the moment between lightning and thunder. Sterling watched the executive's mask finally slip completely away, revealing the calculating predator who had orchestrated decades of destruction. Around them, the elaborate pirate ship set seemed to shrink, becoming a stage for the final act of a tragedy that had begun before Sarah was even born. "You want justice?" Kensington's laugh was bitter, stripped of all pretense. "Your father was an idealistic fool who thought Hollywood ran on handshake deals and moral principles. When Meridian Studios needed their star problem to disappear quietly, Nathan chose righteousness over reality. So we found someone more practical." Sterling felt Sarah tense beside him, her breathing sharp and controlled. Marcus had gone pale, clutching his phone like a lifeline. Even Depp had stepped back, recognizing the gravity of what was unfolding. "My father's death made you rich," Sterling said quietly. "Your father's death saved Meridian Studios from bankruptcy. One helicopter accident prevented a sexual assault scandal that would have destroyed hundreds of careers and cost the studio everything." Kensington's voice carried the cold certainty of a man who'd convinced himself his sins were virtues. Just like Tommy Reeves's accident prevented a wrongful death lawsuit that would have bankrupted the insurance syndicate. And what was supposed to happen tomorrow? Sarah's voice cut through the confession like steel. "What was the grand finale?" Kensington's smile returned, sharp as broken glass. "A tragic accident during the climactic sword fight. Dylan Cross, pushing himself too hard to match Johnny Depp's legendary skills, attempts a dangerous maneuver against safety protocols. The rigging fails, equipment fatigue, impossible to predict. Two Hollywood legends die in a blaze of glory. The film becomes a memorial masterpiece, and the insurance payout funds the studio's expansion into international markets." Cross stumbled backward, his cockiness evaporating like morning mist. "You were going to kill us? You were going to kill yourselves. I was simply going to profit from it." The admission hung in the air like poison gas. Sterling felt the familiar weight of his father's legacy settling over him, but this time it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like purpose. "Marcus," he said quietly, "make the call." The older man's fingers shook as he dialed, but his voice was steady when he spoke to the dispatcher. "This is Marcus Webb, head of rigging for Meridian Studios. I need to report a conspiracy to commit murder and 25 years of insurance fraud." Kensington listened to the call with the resigned calm of a man who'd always known this moment would come. When Marcus finished, the executive straightened his jacket and smoothed his silver hair with practiced vanity. "Do you really think this ends here?" he asked Sterling. "That exposing me somehow cleanses the Sterling family name? The industry will close ranks, protect itself. Evidence will disappear. Witnesses will develop memory problems, and in 6 months this will all be ancient history." "Maybe," Sterling admitted. "But my father was right about something. Sometimes you have to choose your conscience over the money." The sound of sirens grew louder outside, echoing through the soundstage like the approach of long-delayed justice. Sterling watched Kensington's face for any sign of fear or remorse, but found only the cold calculation of a predator cornered but not yet beaten. When the police arrived, Sterling felt Sarah's hand slip into his, the first time they'd touched as father and daughter in 15 years. Her palm was warm and steady, anchoring him to the present moment as decades of buried pain finally began to surface. 3 months later, Sterling sat on the deck of his father's old house in Malibu, watching the sunset paint the Pacific in shades of gold and crimson. The house had been in storage since Nathan's death, maintained by a trust Sterling had never known existed. Coming home felt like waking from a 25-year nightmare. The trial was set to begin next week. Kensington's lawyers were already spinning narratives about industry pressure and impossible choices. But Marcus's evidence was damning, and 3 other executives had agreed to testify in exchange for reduced sentences. The conspiracy ran deeper than Sterling had imagined, touching productions and accidents across decades of Hollywood history. Sarah appeared in the doorway, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the easy smile that had replaced her professional mask. She'd left Meridian Studios the day after Kensington's arrest, taking a position with an independent production company that specialized in documentary films about industry corruption. "Any regrets?" she asked, settling into the chair beside him. Sterling considered the question as he accepted the coffee, feeling its warmth against his palms. His career in Hollywood was over. No studio would hire a stunt coordinator who'd expose their darkest secrets. His sobriety hung by threads some days, the weight of revealed truths harder to bear than the comfort of buried lies. The nightmares about Tommy Reeves had returned with vivid intensity, but Sarah was here, the truth was here, and for the first time in 25 years, Victor Sterling was sleeping through the night. "None that matter," he said finally. The sun disappeared into the ocean, and the Sterling family ghosts finally found their rest.